Hello, welcome to Scary Thoughts, Horror, Philosophy, Culture. I'm Mark Cate.
And I'm Chad Lott.
This is episode 58. We are going to be talking about the Tobe Hooper, Steven Spielberg movie Poltergeist from 1982, and we'll probably get into who actually directed it a little later. Just to prepare you, the next episode will be about...
Stranger Things 3.
That should be fun.
Can't get enough.
You can email us about that or anything else at whatthe@scarythoughts.org. Let's introduce our guest for this episode, Joshua Grannell, a.k.a. Peaches Christ. Hello, Joshua.
Hi.
Two-time returning champion.
Oh,
Am I your first returning guest?
Maggie
Monique.
Wilson. Oh, Monique's been on twice, too.
Fuck her.
Yeah, sorry.
I'm going to have to tell. No, I'm just kidding. Of course she has been. She has the inside track.
She's just in the next room. It's just so easy.
Is she here right now?
No.
Okay.
She's been on 2.1 episodes now.
Yeah.
2.1.
Oh,
Yeah.
That's funny.
yeah, she came in and spoke her piece and then left the room.
Oh, did she hear you recording?
No, we invited her in to
Okay.
clarify.
That's
something.
hilarious.
Yeah.
Do you have anything to plug?
Oh, my goodness. Normally I do. I'm knee deep. Well, this is very apt for the episode and your show in general, but I'm knee deep in building our haunted attraction for the fall. So people go, really, you've started already? I'm like, yeah, we the build started on June 1st. So we're kind of plugging away. So I'm doing 2 haunted attractions at the San Francisco Mint this October. One is called Terror Vault, which is sort of my mashup show of immersive theater with old school haunted house. And the other attraction is a new thing we've created called Apocalypse. The year is 1985, and you and a group have to make your way through an immersive escape room experience, dodging zombies and solving puzzles.
Totally looking forward to it. The Terror Vault last year was really fun. Chad and I went together.
Oh, thank you.
Yeah.
I think it's going to be bigger and better this year.
Yeah, it was so much fun. I'm glad you brought that up because I wanted to ask you about it. Do you write it first or what's the process like for making something like that?
So because I was making it up last year as I went along, I've adjusted my process. Last year, what I did was I wrote it, and then they built it, and then I had to rewrite it, and then we cast it, and then I had to rewrite it, and then we started doing it with audiences, and then I had to rewrite it. So this year, what I've done is I've come up with a character guide and a scene guide, and sort of a floor plan with my partner, my creative partner in the business, David Flower. He's the builder, production designer, and I'm more the storyteller. So right now, what I have is a pretty good idea of what's happening in each scene and who the characters are and what the scene needs to be and where there are mazes versus scenes. But I'm also very aware that as we had a big walkthrough today and it was kind of like, oh, this isn't going to work because we can't get them out this way. So I have to create a moment over here. And a lot of what you're not probably hopefully experiencing is there are scenes that are happening for every audience. So every audience is always experiencing these 7 scenes. Then there are scenes that only happen to certain audiences because those scenes are what I call my stopgap scenes, where I train the actors on what the scene is should they be stalling, because they can hear that there's not enough room for the audience ahead of you.
Oh.
So basically, there are people who came to the show more than once were like, hey, that was so cool. That didn't happen the first time. It's like, well, it's all based on the flow of the show and the way you're moving through it. So if the group ahead of you races through it, you may not get as many scenes. But if the group ahead of you is really slow moving and taking their time, which I appreciate, I actually enjoy that because we work really hard building these things, then you're probably going to get more scenes because the actors are stalling.
You guys sounds like you've got a little bit of Sleep No More in there.
Well, I was very inspired by Sleep No More and actually this Hammer horror immersive show I went to in London.
Oh.
So it was so cool. It was a whole sort of castle of vampires. And you made your way through it. Now, what I don't like about those shows, or what I can't do myself, is control the narrative, right? So that's where I bring in the classic haunted house kind of thing of mazes and pushing you through it in a very specific way. So that's why I kind of call it a mashup. It's not immersive theater in the Sleep No More sense where you're kind of doing a choose your own adventure, but it is in the sense that this is site specific. It's actors telling a story. It's not, oh God, there's Leatherface and over there is a vampire. It's a story. It's a show.
That's great.
Thanks
That
for letting
also
me
makes
plug
me,
it.
yeah, totally. That also just makes me think that I've watched some YouTube videos that dissect exactly how Disney rides work and the pragmatics of like, what if this car stalls? What do they do? You
Right.
can't just bring the entire Magic Kingdom to a halt every time some
Right.
mechanical thing goes wrong. And so how do you keep things going? How do you distract people and keep everything moving?
Yeah.
And it's super complicated.
It is, and there were times with my scene last year, you may remember, like I was in an elevator, and
Yeah.
there were lighting effects and fog and smoke and CO2 things, and another actor who was my body double, and so there was only twice I think where like the audience there were ways to bypass every scene. So I think there was twice where we had to kind of bypass every scene and people didn't know what they missed, which just sucks because on the inside, we're like, oh no, that group didn't get to see me turn into Baphomet or whatever, it's like, but they didn't know,
Right.
they just went through the show.
It's great. Okay, let's start.
Okay.
Let's talk about Poltergeist. Just last little thing. Spoilers ahead. God, if you haven't seen Poltergeist, what have you been doing with
If
your
you haven't
life?
seen it 100 times, you're crazy.
Yeah. So this was your pick.
I know.
We were like, what do you want to do? And this is, I think, the first thing you said. So
It is, which I feel like people maybe don't expect because it's rated PG. It's just a movie that I love so much, and I honestly feel like is still underrated in some ways. Maybe not as much as it used to be. For a long time, I think it was dismissed in the horror universe. Like Nightmare on Elm Street and Texas Chainsaw Massacre and Reanimator even. Like there were so many movies that became horror classics of the 80s, and I felt like Poltergeist often didn't get its fair due.
why do you think that is?
I think because it was rated PG. I think because it was Steven Spielberg.
That would be my thing.
I
Yeah.
think because of those two things, I think are why the horror world, the genre world, kind of turned their nose up at it a little bit. But over time, I think it's earned more respect, and I think it really holds up as being one of the most audacious and ambitious and successful horror films in terms of just doing something completely unique. Very few movies like it, that you can compare it to. Although, I'm talking about before it came out. Of course, after it came out, there's been, a lot of imitations, even recently.
Although while I in many ways agree, I do think it was Spielberg's desire to capitalize on the Amityville horror, which had just happened, which was again about the American anxieties around home ownership.
Right. Oh, interesting. Yeah, I don't know. I mean, probably, maybe.
It's a much better film, no question.
Right.
So, good for him for stepping it up.
Right.
But it didn't come out of nowhere.
Right.
It's also a very sweet movie. It has like kind of a happy ending. Like I pretty much like everything about this movie. Like I think like the last 5 or 6 movies we've done, I've either not really loved or had reservations or whatever. But there's not anything I don't like about this movie. I think the way it's shot is great. I think the special effects were really groundbreaking for its time. The acting is good, and like one of the things it has, I think, in common with Stranger Things, or Stranger Things took from it, are these really like interesting little sweet character building moments. Like later when the mom has her hair has been bleached out from her supernatural experience, she just takes time to dye it in the movie. Just all that stuff grounds the movie and makes it feel very real.
And that's a really good point, I think, in general, about something that movies used to do so much better than they do now. I was talking about this with a friend recently where, what was the example? Oh, we were talking about Midsummer. And, I just said, and we were also talking about the new Halloween. If you've seen, did you guys do the new Halloween?
We haven't covered it, but I've seen it.
And have you guys seen it?
Yeah.
Okay, so J.B. Lee Curtis is like this Terminator, Sarah Connor kind of like Laurie Strode has become. So whatever, that I don't really agree with, and I thought it was ridiculous. But what my bigger problem was the teenagers in that movie were so unlikable and so forgettable and written so obnoxiously and performed in this sort of really flippant, obnoxious way. And I said, God, think about the original Halloween and all the little moments where, like, in the first 15 minutes, you fall in love with Laurie Strode. You fall in love with her friends. They took time to create subtle human moments. And Poltergeist would be one of, and I think a lot of movies back then did that. They really allowed you to sort of, really get to know the characters more intimately. And the family, I mean, the way they set up the family dynamic, you understand it completely. The sibling rivalry, the older sister, the parents' relationship. I mean, and you love them. And so then you're invested in this journey they're about to go on to hell, right? Whereas, like, now, even with Midsummer, I have to say, I just didn't get a sense for why I should care about those, Americans. I hadn't fallen in love with any of them. I didn't have any of those moments. There wasn't any likability. And the protagonist suffers this horrible, dramatic trauma that's totally unrelatable to me. It just was so bizarre. And I actually miss those movies where the sweetness is part of why, you're horrified.
Yeah, you want crazy things to happen to like good people. So there's just more of a dichotomy between it. Like in the remake, the Poltergeist remake, the family's kind of a shitty family. The dad's terrible, and they're kind of on this downward mobility. And in this movie, things are looking up. He's very good at his job. They have this new house. Everybody's mostly happy.
I slightly disagree with you guys, but I think it's consistent with what you're saying, Joshua. I hate the dad. I think he's a fucking...
What?
In Poltergeist?
In Poltergeist. I think he's a fucking douchebag.
God, really?
However, at least he's slightly... at least he has depth.
Yeah.
Like Well, first of all, two things about him. The way he immediately reacts to Zelda, I think, is like, you're just an asshole. Like, you're just a small-minded, judgmental asshole. A short person walks in your house in the middle of terror to help you out through, as far as we know, no monetary gain, and you mock her to her face, and you mock her to everybody else in the room. Go fuck yourself. And I know it's not this movie, it's Poltergeist 2, which is a completely different writer and everything, but he's a straight up racist in that movie. And it's not inconsistent with his character in the first one. And I don't want to retcon because of some shitty writing in Poltergeist 2, but it was like, oh yeah, I can totally see him being totally racist as well. It's not out of line with what's set up in the first movie.
It's interesting that you say that because you're right. I do agree with you. Craig T. Nelson's character is a douchebag, but it's totally in line with suburban 80s fathers.
Yes.
And so I overlook that to some degree because I'm like, he's a straight father in the 80s trying to be upwardly mobile and successful in a career, and he has all those douchebag qualities. However, they did go out of their way to have the scene where he smokes the joint with Jo Beth Williams.
It's the ultimate libertarian
so
scene.
sweet.
He's reading the Reagan biography while smoking pot.
Yes.
There's no more libertarian move in any movie ever.
But it's great, right?
Yeah.
And then the way he treats Carol Ann and his son.
Yeah.
The father stuff is so much more. There's so much love there. He's such a good dad that I'm willing to overlook the douchiness. So you're right. I mean, he is a douchebag. You're totally right. But because of the father thing that they established very well, I mean, he really cares about his kids and his wife.
Yeah, there's all these moments of just sweetness between him and the wife. They're whispering "I love you" to each other. He kisses her really passionately before she goes through the portal.
Yeah,
and
don't
then,
let go.
Yeah, and then
It's amazing.
There's even the scene where she's like, when Tangina's trying to get him to yell at Carol Ann to like provoke her to move away from the light, and she's like, "Tell him you'll spank him." He's like, "I've never hit our kids." Like he's just a good dude.
Yeah.
It's interesting what you were saying
You
about...
said you hated him.
I was overstating a bit. But watching it the second time, I was just like, oh, that guy.
Well, it doesn't help that he's kind of a douchebag in real life.
Oh.
Which for me, as someone who grows up falling in love with people, and as a young gay boy, I think there was a sexual attraction to Craig T. Nelson to some degree, which I've confirmed is not that unusual amongst other gay men my age. There was this sort of like obnoxious masculinity that he did have, both in that movie and in almost every project he ever did, right? He was Coach on that shitty sitcom, right? And then off camera, he's very much an asshole. You know, if you look him up in interviews and stuff, like, so you know, it does all kind of the waters get muddied. So I like to fantasize about the father in Poltergeist too. You know, I love the scene when he and Jo Beth Williams go to the neighbors to ask, "Have you experienced anything strange?" And the weird, you know, fat kid and the father are standing in the doorway, and Jo Beth Williams and Craig T. Nelson are like, they can't believe they're having this conversation, and they're laughing, and they don't know how to, you know, it's such a cool, weird, surreal, human scene that I don't think horror movies they don't include these moments anymore. Like some of the best moments in Poltergeist that we're discussing right now aren't these huge, spectacular moments that the movie's so well known for. It's the little sweet, nuanced stuff, you know.
That scene has such a weird edit right before it too. They're like sitting on the floor in the kitchen, basically like in wonder over the chairs moving around, which is pretty cool. I think if we sat down in this chair, moved around, everyone would sure go on a ride on the chair that moved by itself. But and then it has that just really harsh cut to that scene. There's no transition. There's so many weird little mistakes and continuity errors in this film.
Or moments that take longer than they should. Like, I mean, this is just kind of bitching about film craft. It is such an awkward moment where, at the very end, where his family is inside basically being murdered by the house, and he's running around outside, and he confronts his boss and says, "You moved the gravestones, but not the bodies.
Yeah.
You left the bodies in the ground, and you only moved the stones. You only moved the like it just he just keeps talking like, dude, your family's dying like just around the corner, and you're having this monologue with your boss.
Right.
It's really like keep going.
I always interpreted
clunky.
that to be I'm losing my mind.
Okay.
And he's like hysterical.
Right.
But so it never bothered me. And
Yeah,
of
yeah.
course it's a very
Sure.
iconic moment, right? Like, you moved the headstones, but you didn't move the bodies, did you? You know, he's shaking him and he builds to that sort of frenetic screaming. He's like screaming. I love all the screaming, by the way. I think the screaming in the movie, like, I feel like Tobe Hooper did direct this film. I know we're probably going to get there. And I think he did have a lot of help from Mr. Spielberg. But I would say that, you know, just having seen, you know, the Texas Chainsaw Massacre a lot of times and listening to a lot of screaming, I feel like, you know, a good director gets a certain kind of performance. And the performances I'm not, you know, it's the actors too, obviously. But Jo Beth Williams, Craig T. Nelson, Dominique Dunn, who's barely in the movie, but when she comes home with the hickeys on her neck, have you ever noticed she's covered in hickeys when she gets out of the car?
She has that line about the Holiday Inn too.
Yeah.
She's like, "Oh, I know that place."
Hilarious.
Like, so
There's
good.
so many little Easter egg moments like that as a kid I didn't notice until later, you know, because I watched it so many times and I'm like, oh my God, her neck is covered in hickeys. But you don't notice it because she goes, you know, what's happening? And then she screams, what's happening? You know, really crazy. And then the little boy's screaming, drive away, daddy, drive away. You know, and Craig T. Nelson screaming, don't look back. I mean, flawless.
Yeah.
I mean, just really amazing.
That's true. Although I feel like watching a lot of Tobe Hooper movies and watching a lot of Spielberg movies that I can definitely feel that is a Hooper thing, but one thing that is clearly the imprint of Spielberg is the blocking.
Oh, totally.
There's
for
so
sure.
often like a frame with someone's head in it, and then the head dips down, and then someone else's head dips up into the frame. It's this weird choreography that happens a lot in his movies, but it's excessive in this movie. Like someone will pop into screen. It's really goofy,
Right.
but it creates a movement. People are constantly creating dynamics on screen.
There's a lot of these short little oneers, you know, where there's no edit, or like the camera just stays on. Like for instance, in the scene where the chairs stack, it looks at you look at the chairs. It cuts away to Carol Ann, and then you go back, and the chairs are all stacked, all crazy.
Well, it pans away, right?
Yeah, yeah.
It doesn't. It's not even a cut, which is so great.
Yeah.
Because if you're a film nerd like me, you go, okay, was the crew like someone glued all those chairs together? And yeah, how did they do that? And it was sound, like I love that shot because I do think it was all in one pan.
Yeah, it's one, and the crew literally moves
the chair off. Yeah, they take the chairs away and move the chair. And I would love to see the behind the scenes ballet of that. Yeah.
Yeah. Another thing that this movie has is something I always love in every single movie is the rotating room shot where the room itself is actually rotating.
Yeah.
There's a great one in The Fly. It's one of my absolute favorite.
Nightmare on Elm Street.
Yeah,
I mean, that's maybe the best ever, right? Tina being dragged. But Jo Beth Williams with the panties showing and the fan, blowing up her shirt and stuff. Like, that's the other thing about this movie that's so great is, like, it was unrestrained imagination at play. They really felt like, okay, we're going to take this concept of a poltergeist and make it whatever the F we want it to be. It can take the form of a vaginal anal closet. It can take the form of a giant white ghostly Muppet. It can be wind and spirit, blowing through you. It can be like, I love that there's not really any sort of, now the sequels I feel like kind of deviate from that and in a way that's not satisfying, right? And I never saw the remake because I knew it would make me too mad.
It's trash, just for the record.
I can't. You already forced me to watch Rocky Horror on TV. So I've not seen the Poltergeist remake, and I can't.
I actually talked about the remake and the original on our friend's podcast, Popcorn, Piss, and Vinegar. And, like, it's such a disappointing movie. It's just, like, it might be my least favorite remake of any film ever.
Wow.
It's such trash, and it basically shits on everything that is, like, wonderful about this movie.
Right.
Like, it's all muted and dark, and it's a cynical movie. It's very nihilistic. It doesn't have Tangina in it, which is a huge crime, I guess.
Do they have a psychic at the end?
Kind of, but it's just handled differently. It's not as like, you get the feeling that all the people who are involved in the paranormal research in this movie were really drawn to it because it's like not a goof for them, but like they're really passionate about it. Like this psychologist woman, she's so into it. She's like, well, I have this regular career, but this is what I'm really into.
Right.
People have like a love for it, which I think is fun.
Yeah. On top of all that unrestrained imagination, the other thing the movie has is a core primal fear element. Mm-hmm. We're going to take your child, and whether you're a child or a parent, you're going to be terrified because one way or the other, you're going to relate with this side or that side or both. And we're going to play with something that most horror movies don't really dare to do, which is take a kid away from its parents, specifically its mother, and then taunt that parent with this whole scenario. And that, I think, is so, like, wow. And I think because they had that, they knew they could kind of do whatever they wanted. And that's what makes it so fun, right? Toys moving around on their own. That scene where she opens the door and apologizes to the ghosts. I mean, amazing. Just some of the moments in this movie, like, how many iconic moments are there? I mean, like 100, right? And the pool sequence, I mean,
With real skeletons.
yeah. I went to Universal Horror Nights last year only because they did Poltergeist. So I was like, I'm not missing it. I'm going down there because they will typically do all their new franchises, right? So, like, the line for Stranger Things was enormous. Of course, I bought the expensive, Fast Pass or whatever. So for those listeners that don't know, Universal Horror Nights in, I guess, Orlando and LA, they turn Universal Studios into a giant park of haunted mazes. And they use the Universal properties to create these mazes. And each maze is probably like 10 to 12 minutes, and people wait in very long lines to go through these things. So last year, Stranger Things was really popular. The Blumhouse one was very popular. Of course, they do, Halloween and I don't know, whatever. But they did Poltergeist, and they built the facade of the house. So you walked up to the house, and it was all flashing in the strobe lights. I mean, just the strobe lights alone in the movie, And I have to say, of all the mazes at Universal last year, that was the one that really delivered.
There's a lot in the film that's really fun about the building of the pool in the background. Like one, there's the workers that are like basically harassing the 16-year-old daughter, and the mom is just proud of her for giving them the finger. Doesn't correct the dudes or get mad when they lean through her window to like eat her food and all that stuff. But the other thing is there's this weird little bit of foreshadowing where they've buried the parakeet in the yard, and then the bulldozer like pushes the dirt over, and it like pushes over the parakeet's coffin. So it's kind of like foreshadowing the coffin at the end of it.
You're right. Never thought of that before.
Yeah, I'm obsessed with this movie. It's the earliest movie I can remember seeing.
Well, you know, I feel like, I mean, I think I'm a bit older than you, but I know that for me, I remember when it came out. It came out in '84, so I was 10. I was so desperate to see it. I think maybe Temple of Doom was out around the same time, because basically they credit Temple of Doom, the Indiana Jones sequel, and Poltergeist with why the MPAA created a PG-13 rating, because parents were so livid that they brought their kids to see a movie like Temple of Doom where, you know, someone's heart is ripped out and monkey brains are eaten or whatever else. And then, of course, Poltergeist, which totally blew people's minds, you know, and for it is bizarre that it was rated PG, you know, it is strange. So I wanted to see it so badly, and my parents would not take me to see it. However, at the time, home box office was kind of a new thing, and my parents had it. And so when it hit home box office, that's when HBO would run the same movie like 10 times a day for 2 years. So once it was on TV, my parents didn't have any control, you know. So we watched Poltergeist like sometimes every day, like for an entire summer.
Yeah, I had the same
loved it.
experience. I couldn't even tell you how many times I've seen it.
Yeah. Well, we haven't talked about the score, which I personally love. I know it's over the top, but Carol Ann's theme, the choir, all of it, I love.
I have never thought about the score.
The score is amazing.
Is it?
I love that
Yes.
they use the same kind of segments when they're introducing the community Cuesta Verde as at the very end of the film, so it has this kind of like sweet bookend.
Yes.
With the music, I think is really fun.
Yeah.
And then the score gets very dramatic when the first storm clouds are coming in over the community, and then everything goes off the rails.
Yeah. And then the score just goes berserk. I mean, it's just an incredible soundtrack, but it has that iconic na 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 na, you know, all that, which I love. You know, I mean, like really, it goes all over the map. I love it so much that, you know, I work with the San Francisco Symphony regularly now. I do a big show for the last 3 years for the holidays. And so, you know, they do these movie screenings where the symphony plays the score live. So we went and saw Batman, which was really fun. The Tim Burton first Batman, and the score for that, of course, is super big, and you know, Danny Elfman, and really loud. And then we went and saw more recently Call Me by Your Name, and I was like, why this movie? Which my partner really loves that movie, and I like the movie too, but you know, it just didn't feel like why am I at the symphony hall listening to this? You know, a lot of it's just piano or whatever.
Something really epic if you're going out to the symphony. Yeah.
So I was having a meeting with them the other day, and I said, you know, I just have to tell you, if you could get the charts for Poltergeist and do a Poltergeist screening, you know, with the symphony, and bring in a choir, and the artistic director I'm working with, of course this has to pass like a million people's desks or whatever, but he was like, you know, that's a really good idea. So I'm telling you now, if the symphony does it, you can thank me.
Okay.
I so wanted it to happen. So I guess this might be a good transition into the Tobe Hooper versus Steven Spielberg, who directed it thing. Yeah. But Jerry Goldsmith claims to have not worked with Tobe Hooper at all during the creation of the score. Yeah.
Maybe we should outline for the listeners, at least quickly, what we're talking about, because to be honest, I did not know any of this information until a few days ago. I went really deep into it, but I had no idea.
Okay.
Yeah. So this movie started off as a sort of sequel to Close Encounters, and it was going to be an alien siege movie called Night Skies. And there's a famous alien attack on a house story that happened. I can't remember when it happened, but it's pretty much what Critters is based on. And so this movie was going to originally be, instead of ghosts attacking a family, it was going to be like aliens kind of coming in and attacking a family. And Close Encounters was supposed to be like the good aliens, and then this was going to be the bad aliens movie, and then E.T. was, or Close Encounters was going to be like neutral, E.T. was going to be good aliens, and these were going to be the bad cousins. But, things happen, and then it becomes Poltergeist, and then Spielberg's shooting E.T. at the same time as Poltergeist is being shot, and he can't really, even though he's writing it, producing it, he's not allowed by the guild, I guess, to direct both movies. So he brings in, young hot horror director Toby Hooper.
That's a good setup. Yeah.
But what happens is that Steven Spielberg is on set giving a lot of direction every day of shooting except for 3 days when he had to be off set for ET related stuff. And then Toby Hooper gave in his first edit and then had, it seems, nothing to do with the film after that. So Steven Spielberg had all future cuts, worked with the composer, everything post except for the rough cut. And so if you read interviews with almost everybody involved in that movie, everybody has something slightly different to say.
They do. That's the thing that's interesting. The actors say different things.
Yeah.
Yeah, because I've been fascinated by this for years. And I actually don't really care at the end of the day because I just love the movie so much. I do worry, though, I guess as a filmmaker, I really hope that Toby Hooper is not being unfairly maligned.
I think
you know what
he
I mean?
is.
That's how I feel about it. I mean, just based on things I've read, when the actors come to his defense, that to me says a lot.
Yeah.
Because I'll tell you, actors who don't feel supported by a director, they will not come to that director's defense at all.
Right.
I mean, at best, they'll say nothing.
Well, I think also something that I was reading is the way that laws and rules are in place around Hollywood productions. Attribution of credit is very constructed, and so it's really hard to go in the wake of a film to say this was a collaboration with the producer. You can collaboratively direct a film, but a producer can't declare that they are a co-director. It seems that the industry protects producer takeovers in certain instances, and this is maybe an instance in which that's the case. But I think what's clear is there was a collaboration, and it seems to have been harmonious between the two of them. But if I read between the lines a little bit, and I don't know what you guys came across, it seems that Spielberg was completely off his tits on coke the entire time. Really? Absolutely. And it seems that Toby Hooper went into rehab shortly after. And so it seems like maybe a conflict of altered states happening on set where Spielberg's cocaine overrode Hooper's heroin. Who the fuck knows what
Right.
I just couldn't find out what he went to rehab for. It just was just that he went to rehab. Whether that's true or not, I don't know. But it seems that a lot of his life he was struggling with something. And that's why his output has been so inconsistent throughout his life, where he's able to do, this and then Life Force, which is fine, and then some fucking stinkers, and then Chainsaw 2, which is just fucking magical.
Yeah.
And then he did a lot of bad movies again. But I wonder if it was just like, if you've got a junkie and a cokehead in a room, who's going to get the film done?
Right. And there is, I mean, at least having worked on movies, nothing like a Hollywood film or anything, but just working on independent films, there's definitely credits that people get that can mean different things. So with producer credits, there are producers who are completely absent from the creative process. They're just not creatively involved, but they're still producing, and they still do a lot to earn that producer credit. There's a lot a producer can do to make sure that the movie happens and that the movie's made without being creative. Then there are producers that are very creative and very hands-on with the creative process. And I think both are very allowed in the Hollywood system. But for whatever reason, this movie, I think partly it's because it did feel so like Spielberg. It
doesn't look or feel like a Toby Hooper movie at all.
Right.
Though Toby Hooper's really good about those character building oddball scenes that
Yes.
are in there, you know. So, like the long scene of them at the breakfast table and the glass breaks. That feels very Toby Hooper, like sort of like futzing around like banality a little bit to set up something crazy later. But every piece of camera movement feels like a Spielberg movie to me.
Right. That's fair. I want to bring something up. Chad, you had raised the smoking pot and reading the Reagan bio. But I'm curious what you guys think about the possible politics of this movie, because on one hand, it, again, like Amityville Horror, it's about the anxieties of home ownership and domesticity and the American suburbs and the American dream and how it can all be taken away from you. But it also seems to be a bit of a critique of American expansionism because, you know, thoughtlessly paving over or developing over gravestones, there seems to be an implicit critique in there. This movie starts with the national anthem, which, if you know the directors, it's hard not to read as maybe being somehow cynical. This is not a rah-rah American film, but the first thing that happens is it's the national anthem. And this movie is all like kids on bicycles in the suburbs. The men are watching football, you know? So is this a critique of those things, or is it just sort of like, it's just a backdrop? And
No, I think you're onto something. I think I've always related to that critique. I mean, the end of that national anthem, I've never heard the national anthem played for spooky effect.
Yeah, it's
quite the
it's
same
almost
way.
distorted.
It's almost distorted. It cuts to that static thing. You already know from the brilliant, you know, marketing campaign that snowy television is not a good thing. I think it's definitely a critique of fast expansion and thoughtless development. I think that's all in there.
I think what's funny though is I that's what I think, but I also have to take with skepticism any Hollywood producer's critique of American capitalism. You know what I mean? Like a big Hollywood director high on cocaine critiquing American capitalism just sounds totally preposterous to me. It's just, does that make sense?
Yeah. I think though, Spielberg is complicated. And in a way, like if David Lynch had directed this film, because of his body of work, we'd go, well, of course that's what it is. David Lynch is obsessed with the facade of American values and the American dream. And all of his movies are really about both loving that and also calling it out as bullshit in a horror movie, right? Like, so the beginning, in some ways, the beginning of Poltergeist, you could look at something like the beginning of Blue Velvet, where, you know, it's the suburban idyllic, you know, neighborhood and everything you think of a Norman Rockwell kind of landscape, but then that heart attack happens and that dog is bouncing around as the guy's hose, and then the camera goes underground and we see the roaches and the insects or whatever. It's like, I think in a way, you know, Poltergeist is similar, and I would be surprised because yes, they're very successful filmmakers, but they were also young and new to a lot of their success and probably still aspiring artists. And, you know, I don't know. I feel like that critique is there, and I think you're right. Is it hypocritical? Maybe, you know, but
I think it's a much more layered critique than you get now. Now you get like, it's bad. This is why it's bad, and just it's so like just reflective of the shitty tone of the news now. Whereas this film, it's, I mean, with that opening scene with the national anthem, but it cuts to the end of the night. It's playing on this like Morning in America sort of thing, where it's Morning in America, but it's the dead of night, and then the film and the TV goes off at 2:37, which might be a nod to The Shining, which is kind of a cool little thing. But I think Spielberg both loves that this is a place where kids can ride on BMX bikes and it's cool and it's fun and it's a nice place to raise kids, but it's also built on a graveyard. You know, so it has both of those things going on.
And he does have criticisms in E.T. I mean, it's not like the government is not completely, and not just the government, but adults in general. You know, E.T. was not even allowed to be shown in China because it was so anti-government and anti-adult, you know. So I feel like he did, especially at that stage of his career had this aspiration to, have those sort of criticisms in the work that he was doing. And I think to some degree it's why I loved E.T. as a kid. I mean, I totally related to being a kid who had a dream of a special alien friend. I mean, that's what kid, I fell for E.T. completely. And part of it was not fucking trusting adults, and feeling like adults didn't understand me. And with this, I think the developer and his greed is completely representative of something Spielberg felt was happening in the Reagan era and, with the country at the time.
Yeah, the great James Karen, who died last year, playing the developer.
Oh, right. Yeah. Did he die last year?
Yeah, October. Oh. One of the great character actors of all time. Even better in Return of the Living Dead.
So good.
Yeah.
Oh, right.
Yeah.
He was in a lot of movies.
Yeah, he was great. Just a total genre dude. One of my favorite scenes in this film is the scene where he's talking to Craig T. Nelson and they've gone up into the hills, and it kind of echoes the story in the Bible where the devil takes Jesus up on a hill and says, look, all this can be yours. Because he kind of takes him up there and he's like, hey, look, this could be your view. You've already sold half the houses down here. Let's sell everything that's up on this hill. And then Craig T. Nelson, he has this whole thing where it's like, well, it's called Cuesta Verde, which is green hills, and everybody has a view of the green hills. Who wants to be in the valley? And he's like, well, you won't be in the valley. And then he turns around and looks at the graveyard that they're standing next to, and there's this really cool shot where the cross is in the foreground and Craig T. Nelson's kind of standing with his arms out, almost like Jesus. And he's like, that's sacrilegious, isn't it? They're talking about moving the graves. It's such a cool scene. And it's basically like the anchor point for the mythology of the film.
I never thought of that, but I love it. Because I know the movie so well that everything you're describing, I'm like, oh yeah. But I think, again, like all this thought and all this care is intentional. Mm-hmm. And if it's not, well, what beautiful happy accidents. But I mean, especially as far as the commentary or critique of greed, I think that's very intentional,
What do you guys think about the way in which the afterlife and demons and ghosts and all that is constructed in this movie? Like, I feel like I'm totally on board, but I kind of can't quite follow it. And to be honest,
right,
I don't know that I really know what the plot of this movie is. The ghosts wanted to bring Carol Ann in because she reminds them of being alive, and that distracts them from going to the light and being actually dead. But then there's also a demon or multiple demons who are going to take advantage of that in some way and want to come into this world. Like, I kind of actually don't know what happened.
Well, the interesting thing about that,
I don't know that I care.
Well, one of the things I like about the script is, at least in the first one, and again, the sequels kind of mess this all up, is that you're getting these interpretations through people who are inconsistent, who are, we find out in the script, don't really know what they're talking about.
Yeah, well, even just the go into the light, don't go into the light.
Yes.
You're supposed to go into the light. That switches so many times.
Only the mother. She can only hear the mother. Father, say something.
Yes, exactly.
Yeah.
So I love that it's all in the script, that the humans that are supposedly the experts know nothing. Mm-hmm. And, that... So my concept of what you're asking is, well, we don't know. We don't really know, and we're not supposed to know necessarily. But what we do know is that they took this girl. We do know that. And that their corpses, I mean, I think we can all agree that these are the ghosts of the corpses who have been, unrested by this development and this stuff, that these ghosts are pissed and that they are taking revenge on this family or acting out or upset. Like, we know that, right? But yeah, as far as all the stuff that we learned from, I forget the first woman's name, the first ghost expert that comes in, who I love. I love every actor in this movie.
Oh, yeah.
And I love her team, the black guy and the white guy that come with her. I think they're both fantastic.
The white dude looks weirdly like Cillian Murphy, right?
He does.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah, I was kind of like Cillian Murphy's dad.
Yeah, but great. Like they all have great moments. They all have great reactions.
Well, I think this confusion also, for me, a lot of it is because Zelda, I'm sorry, what's the actress? Tangina. She just kind of like walks in and goes, "Here's what's up. Everybody fall in line." And that's what happens. And it
But
kind
then
of,
she also says this house is clean.
Right.
And
With
then
her
all hell
after-sex
breaks
hair.
loose.
Yeah, like she's...
I mean, best line of the movie, maybe,
Amazing.
but she was wrong.
yeah.
Yeah, and there's that great scene right before the mother goes through the portal when she's like, "You've never done this before, neither of you." I love that scene. Well, one, it's such a loud scene because there's so much special effects and strobe lights going on that it really does. I mean, it sort of gets back to the parenthood of the early '80s. No one knows what the fuck is going on, and it's sort of this moment of just parenthood. Like I don't know what to do.
They kind of, it's all in the script, right? You're right. You go. It's all like, I don't know what I'm talking about. I'm making this shit up as I go along. I love that. And so then again, unrestrained imagination.
Mm-hmm.
They kind of have, the closet monster mouth and tail, and they have, it's just, I take it to be like these spirits, a poltergeist can take any form, can do anything at all, including take your child away from you, including possess a tree, and have that tree break through a house. I mean, it's ridiculous. It's insane. We can't really, but I let's look at it as, possess a clown doll or whatever, as we're super pissed. You shouldn't have messed with us. You've built this home over our dead bodies, and now we're going to torture your family, kidnap your daughter, which is fantastic because now you can't say, why the hell don't you just leave? That's one of the most brilliant parts of the film is, most of these movies, I'm like, why wouldn't you just leave? These haunted ghost story movies, like, you just don't understand why people stick around, and they do, just to be more, experience more horror. In this movie, you know exactly why they don't leave. They're not going to leave her. They're not going to leave her there.
Yep.
Yeah, I just love this movie. And I think to answer your question, it's delicious that we don't know. And I love that we don't have any sort of particular persona to take the form of what the poltergeist is. And in fact, because they're all creatures and monsters and corpses, and we don't have like that character in the second one, which I hate because I feel like it ruins it. When they're talking about the other side, you only have your imagination. And so when she's saying things like, he's coming towards me, I'm scared. It's so much scarier when you don't see what he looks like,
Yeah.
We do get a sense for there. I like the sort of artifacts and stuff that come through the portal.
I love
covered in
some are
slime.
old, some are new.
Right.
Or just like a graveyard.
It's brilliant. Yeah.
One line that gets kind of missed a little bit is that they mention that Carol Ann's born in the house, which sort of explains their weird attraction to
It's
her.
true. Yes.
But on the Laserdisc extras, there's a trailer that's not like the main trailer. I don't know when it would ever be shown, but it talks about how the spirits in the house are like children, and so they start by playing and eventually develop into like a tantrum, which is the end of it. So it's really interesting that like there's this like childhood thing with the spirits, and like they're always playing with the toys. Like you have the Incredible Hulk riding a horse going across, and then whenever the little boy is playing with toys, he's doing like the same sort of stuff that the spirits are doing. Like he's like shooting a laser gun at a clown, and then he's throwing a thing in the air and smashing a truck. It's like the poltergeists have this like manic childhood explosion all the time.
Right. Yeah, and I guess I didn't know much about ghost definitions before the movie came out, and as a kid I was fascinated. But the poltergeist, I think, definition is sort of an angry, temper tantrum throwing ghost. I mean, I think that's sort of what it is, right? Like these are the most hostile, irritable ghosts, or that kind of presence.
The the German translation I read about this today is like noisy ghost. So,
Okay.
Yeah.
Well, they sure were noisy. Yeah, and I love how I love in this movie that again, the unrestrained imagination and also just the unrestrained sort of soundtrack and lighting effects, where it was like, we're not going to hold back at all. Like if you ever see any of the behind the scenes stuff, just what the set looked like when they're doing the tennis balls and the the rope and all that, like it's like 20 huge strobe lights, in a corner
Through like an aquarium.
Wild. Yes, through aquariums and all sorts of stuff. I love that.
Yeah. There's also like a weird like techno critique going through it. Like I read this really great kind of breakdown of the poster, like because this movie had a really awesome like kind of ad campaign around it, and the great line "They're here," but the poster is really almost like a sci-fi poster. It has like a sans serif font, and it has the TV as the main focal point of it, and it's black and blue, which is very similar to other posters, and it actually even has a similar composition
I
to
think the poster's black and white.
Is it?
Yeah, I think because I had an original one sheet for years.
Cool.
I actually still have it. And what's surprising about it is I'm almost positive it's just white poster with black ink.
Oh, cool.
The whole thing.
But it's so sparse. It's like the Alien poster, kind of.
Yeah.
And there's an Alien poster in the kid's room.
Yeah,
which is kind
yeah.
of like, so you definitely, those parents are super permissive, letting them see that.
Although one thing about connected to that I think is interesting is the ubiquity of George Lucas Star Wars property. So one thing about there being so much Star Wars shit in this movie, obviously Spielberg and Lucas are friends and whatever, but it's realistic, right?
I was going to say, Mark,
my
you and I are the same age.
No, absolutely
like,
realistic.
That was real, yeah.
But it just sort of, it just sort of reminds me of this something that was pointed out to me once, that because the Beatles had such a stranglehold on their music being used in any movies ever, they just didn't allow it to happen. And so that means that almost all movies from when the Beatles took off in America and Hollywood until the present, where their music's been disallowed from use, it means that all movies are untrue documents of what people were listening to.
Oh, right.
Because if all of America was listening to the Beatles all the time and they were never in any movies, all those movies are wrong about what people are mostly listening to. And it's like at first like, Jesus Christ, what's with all the Star Wars stuff? Oh yeah, I had that much Star Wars stuff too.
Right.
So,
yeah, it really is realistic. And I kind of like knowing that they were sort of this brat pack of filmmakers who had a lot of success. And, they were friends before they were successful, which is pretty cool. I like sort of that sort of those nods to each other's films. But also that was, if you were a little boy at that time, all of us, everyone, we had Star Wars crap. Whether I didn't even want it and I had it, because it's what people gave you at Christmas.
Yeah. What else?
God, I could, talk about anything related to the movie. I don't know if you want to talk about the supposed curse, which a lot of people like to talk about. I actually personally don't find it that interesting. I don't think the movie was
There's not enough.
cursed. It's sad. It's like, it's sad that she died. It's sad that Dominique Dunn died the way that she died. That's awful and sad.
Yep.
And it's sad that Heather O'Rourke died. And, who else died in that film? I don't know.
Not until a lot later.
Right. So it's like,
was
I don't
but
buy
it was
that
like
there's a
Poltergeist
curse.
2.
Yeah, I don't buy that there's a curse. I just find it tragic that these two, actors passed away prematurely.
The little boy was almost killed by the clown effect too.
Really?
Yeah,
I didn't know
like
that.
it like when it went to pull him, like it was basically like kind of constricted around his neck and almost choked him to death.
Oh, wow.
So with the curse, it's often attributed to the fact that they used real skeletons in the pool scene, and that's why this movie and the franchise is cursed. But it's funny that this movie is somehow critiquing the unconscious use of and desecration of people's remains, and it's actually using people's remains.
So I didn't know they used real skeletons.
Yeah, the skeletons in this movie are real skeletons.
Really?
They were cheaper to acquire than fake ones.
Really?
Yeah. So this movie actually transgresses exactly. If there is a critique in this movie, it's like, don't abuse the dead.
Right.
And it's
Yeah,
like,
yeah.
and it's
That's
like,
right.
that's exactly what they did.
And that's what they did. Yeah. Well, then that makes the curse a little more interesting. That pool scene. I mean, I feel like, as far as, we like to talk about Scream Queens, and I don't think Jo Beth Williams gets considered in that canon because it's not a slasher film. She's not the final girl in a conventional sense. But I have to say, as far as women in horror, I think her performance in this movie is up there with Sissy Spacek and Carrie and Shelley Duvall in The Shining. Like, it's one of the greatest women in peril performances, and so smartly done and so strong and so realistic. And that pool scene with her diving into the water and climbing up the walls and sliding back down this slopey, muddy, can you imagine? I mean, just imagine what that was like to shoot. I mean, and she obviously is doing it. I love her in this movie.
I also think that Heather O'Rourke's performance in this movie is like maybe the best child performance of any.
It's great.
She is totally electric the entire movie.
Yeah. She's not in it that much, though.
She's not in that much, but every line is like totally iconic.
Yeah,
she's
that's
captivating.
True. You're right.
She makes these. It's hard to talk about a child as making choices, like a trained actor. But
you're right, though.
She just hangs on these moments, and everything is slightly awkward
those reactions,
and endearing.
Right? When the closet's opening back up, and she's sitting in the bed saying, "Not again."
Yeah.
I mean, really incredible performance. You're right.
I think like my favorite moment for her in the movie is the burial of the parakeet.
Yeah.
And there's so much weird. Like the mom is like trying to flush a parakeet down the toilet. Like, how much trust do you have in this toilet? That it's going to take a toilet. Like, it's definitely not San Francisco plumbing. But then the little girl's like, "Oh, I don't want the bird to be alone. So, like, here's a picture of the family to go with the bird, and I want it to have a blanket." And then she's like, "This box smells funny," and it's like where they keep their weed. It's just like there's just so much like little stuff in that scene.
And then she's totally disinterested, which is such a kid thing, right? Yeah. Like, she's on to the next thing.
Yeah, can I have a goldfish now?
Yeah, exactly.
I have one, I know I have issues with everything, but I do have one issue I can't get over.
Hater ass Mark.
Yeah.
I actually expected it to be worse than this. So, yeah.
Was that tree really there for 4 fucking years at that kid's window? Was that monster planted outside that window and no one bothers to close the curtains? That's the one thing in this movie where I'm like, I can't suspend my disbelief. I can suspend my disbelief that like you have this terrifying clown and you just leave it lying around in the middle of the night, maybe, but that tree, like, no.
I couldn't find who designed the creature effects for the tree, and I was really hoping to find out if it was the same designer of E.T. because there's like an E.T. shape to it, but like kind of an evil, but an evil E.T. And I was wondering if that was like just DNA from like Night Skies, if they had like an evil looking character around and they're like, well, let's just repurpose this for the tree.
For Night Skies? I'm sorry, what?
Well, Night Skies that wasn't made that became Poltergeist. Like, so it was being concepted around the same time E.T. was. So I'm wondering if like they were like, oh, let's make it crazy looking.
I don't know. I mean, I would say that my criticism regarding that is that the tree doesn't look real.
That's true.
Is that what you're saying? Because
no,
but I find it believable that there would be a big spooky tree next to a suburban home.
I had one in my yard.
Yeah,
and we called it the spooky tree, and it had an animal graveyard underneath it. Like, it was right out of this movie.
Right. Okay, there you go. Now, is that what you have trouble believing? I don't understand.
It's hokey looking.
What do you have trouble believing?
That there is this thing that looks like a monster that is going to this dead tree.
Okay, I see what you're saying.
That is terrifying to me.
Yeah,
3 feet from the window of a child's bedroom for 4 years.
Oh, interesting. I never questioned it because I always just thought it was normal to have spooky trees. I will say that I thought the tree looked.
It's fake.
Yeah, like fake. I love this movie. Yeah. Very little do I ever criticize about it. But the tree stuff, I I mean, it's not the strongest stuff in the film.
The angry molesting tree, like from Cabin in the Woods, like
Right.
is one of the options for death.
Right.
It's
yeah.
so good.
Yeah. Well, it makes sense, right? Because it's shown up in more than one movie.
Yeah.
But yeah, I think and the tree's like kind of swallowing him, and well, I mean, I guess the tree is what causes Carol Ann to go missing or whatever.
Yeah. Well, it was a distraction.
They get the function of it, but yeah, I don't know.
Well, it was a distraction. It was like they grabbed the kid as
Yeah.
a distraction to get everybody to go outside.
Yeah.
So that they can
I
swallow.
love all
Caroline.
that.
That's great.
Yeah.
So I want to ask you experts. More confusion I have about the plot, or not the plot, about the screenplay. Without referring to Poltergeist 2 and 3, does Carol Ann have The Shining? Is this something we understand? Or is she just like pure and young and that's why they want her? Or is, it's elaborated in the future films, but is there something about her that is unique other than that she was born there?
Well, I think your point of her birth taking place in her home is really strong.
But was there something else? Did they allude to there being more to her than that?
Well, she basically like seems that she's communicating with the spirit of the dead parakeet in a weird way.
Yeah.
And I think that's the only clue in the film.
Well, there's also the mom says, I used to sleepwalk too. And so there's something else, like something that happens with her and her daughter at night. And again, that's explored in the future films, but I'm wondering if the seed was actually consciously planted in the first film. I don't know.
Not that I've ever picked up on. Personally, and I have watched the movie a lot, always felt like the ghosts were specifically interested in her.
Yeah.
And so they spoke specifically to her through the television or whatever. And you almost get the sense that she might have been communicating with them in other ways as well. Maybe not just through the TV people or whatever, but that she didn't necessarily have a sixth sense herself, but that they were communicating with her. And they could have communicated with anyone, but they chose her. That was always my sense.
Yeah.
But like you say, the sequels. See, I don't consider the sequels because I feel like the first one's just this perfect movie that the sequels kind of, mess up a little bit, which sequels often do,
Yeah.
So, I just don't pay attention to the sequels. What's that character's name that's in the sequels that everyone loves so much that I can't stand?
The tall...
Yes, the Angus Scrim looking guy.
I think-
Reverend Kane.
Reverend Kane,
I
yes.
think he's great. I think it doesn't work. I think he is fantastic. I
He's
think his
great.
performance is really, really terrifying.
Yeah, he's great.
Like
but
I think on par with Zelda and
Yeah.
and Carol Ann, but it's not a good character.
Yeah, it doesn't. It just takes the plot in
It's
a direction
hokey,
that I'm
yeah.
not interested in.
Yeah, I agree. He was part of the Living Theater. He was one of the
Oh, really?
originators of the Living Theater. Yeah, he's no fucking joke.
Well, he's good. I mean, no doubt he's good, but it's more like, oh yeah, I just didn't care for it.
Yeah.
What now? Have you seen this movie? Oh my God, I'm going to forget the name. It's a totally popular horror movie, and it's a franchise, and I think it's called Insidious.
Yeah, I've seen one and maybe two.
Okay, and this is where they have a house that's haunted, right?
Yeah.
And it's essentially Poltergeist.
Sure.
Right? Like they bring in this ghost expert
Yeah.
and then they actually go to the other side.
Most haunted house films, I think, at this point are like, something bad is happening. Let's get the experts. The experts
Right.
get freaked out and too involved.
Right.
Like that's
It's true.
It's
Just
a
interesting
staple.
that this film is about them actually going to the other side and they show the other side
Yes.
in Insidious. Yeah. And
Well,
again,
yeah, that's true.
with
Yeah.
the like sort of devil creature and stuff, I was like, yeah. Well, Stranger Things, the Upside Down. I mean, the Upside Down in many ways you could argue is the other side, right? Like,
sure.
Obviously Stranger Things I think borrows a lot from Poltergeist. A lot, right? I mean, the first season the kid is communicating with his mother through Christmas lights. It's like, that's Poltergeist,
Yeah.
I wonder how much. It would be interesting to, because it's a lot. But I never really thought about it. But the other side is essentially, the upside down, you know.
Yeah, that like gelatinous ecto ivy that's on
Totally.
the door is, I mean, it's
Yes.
clearly borrowed by Stranger Things.
Yeah.
Which I love all that weird ghostly gelatinous stuff. And when we used to do Poltergeist, we would have a kiddie pool off to the side of the. Did you ever see when we did Poltergeist?
No.
Oh yeah, I've done
God damn it.
Poltergeist a few times, and Martini was always getting sucked into the movie screen, and you know we would do like I was actually for theater it was pretty well done. Like you know we would have a closet door on one side of the stage and strobe lights going crazy, and I would throw a tennis ball through the closet door stage right, and the tennis ball would come flying out stage left, you know, and like just little visual gags like that. We'd throw the rope through and the rope would come out the other side. And so we did a thing where Martini and I got into a kiddie pool of basically Jello backstage. So like when we kind of climbed up a ladder and threw ourselves off of it and slammed onto the stage, we were covered in, you know, slop. And it really, you know, those little touches the audience would go crazy for. Peggy Legs was Tangina.
Oh, great.
She was amazing.
Of course.
Yeah. And she did the whole monologue. That monologue, whether she knows what she's talking about or not, is still one of the best moments on cinema.
It's mesmerizing.
You know?
Yeah.
I don't remember the monologue, but like every sentence, every word, Zelda Rubinstein deserves all trophies and prizes for that moment.
I mean, it's such like 700 Club meets National Enquirer theology. I mean, it's like I was talking to somebody on Instagram today, and they were like, "Oh, you know, you could talk about the blending of the mythos and all this stuff." And to me, it was like it's exactly like what like a drunk person who is into tarot cards outside of a 7-Eleven would believe.
Right.
You know, it's just like this total mixture of just this wild grab bag of like maybe you read a book by the Warrens and some Edgar Casey shit, and you know you stayed up too late smoking too much reefer. Like it's just a perfect blend of just weird shit.
And she sells it.
Yeah,
like she sells every word of it. You know. Now let's go get your daughter. I mean, it's just, you know, it's amazing.
Yeah, and I was reading an interview with her, and she was actually pretty amazing. She was an AIDS activist and all this. You know, she was a really cool person.
She lived in West Hollywood, I think. And
yeah,
like, you know, was of the gays for sure. Yeah.
Yeah, but one of the things she talked about is like as a little person, she said that when you come into a room, you have about 30 seconds to own the room. Otherwise, you'll be completely dismissed. And that's exactly what she does in the film. And she even like pushes back on his Wizard of Oz joke, you know, and she just like really alphas him. And you just would have had to have lived that, I think, to be able to do that in a film.
Yeah, I love her so much that I have in my living room, you know, I have a pillow of her.
Well, sorry if I'm.
Yeah.
That's a drag queen strategy.
Yeah.
You know, that's a queer survival technique.
Yeah.
It's like if you're it's better to be the queer kid who walks into the room and is so fabulous that everybody's afraid to cross you than to be the quiet queer kid who's maybe going to get made fun of.
Well, the sissy who's been shamed for being effeminate their whole life. It's like, well, I'm going to put on a wig and I'm going to be more effeminate than you could ever imagine, and I'm going to back you down. Like, you're exactly right. Like, I think when people are minorities or oppressed or easily, you know, dismissed, you have a choice. And it's like she really does come into that whole sequence where she comes in and he is being a douchebag and they're desperate for help, and he's, you know, really dismissing her, you know, based on mostly her physical appearance, it seems like, you know, which is so fucked up. But the way she pushes back, and then of course the sequence where she's upstairs and she can hear him, you know, that's so great because it's like, I am magical, you know, and I have powers that you don't, like, they don't ever explain that, but it's just a great moment.
Also, further, her line, I am talking to the living, is so fucking shady.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Or what she says when she's like, I don't like trick answers. It's such a great line, but it doesn't make any sense in the context of what they're talking about. Because he didn't ask her anything.
Right.
You know?
Yeah, another moment, and I know we've talked about these beautiful little moments in the movie. Another moment that I love is the moment between Jo Beth Williams and the first woman where they're having the drink out of the flask. It's just another human moment where two women are just connecting over this little shot, And yeah, it's moments like that ground this thing so that when she's being thrown all around a room in her panties or like tossed in a swimming pool, you are just rooting for her so much. And yeah, I think a lot of movies now don't bother with that sort of connective tissue that we need.
Well, I think that's, we were talking about Stranger Things earlier. Like, that's a problem with Stranger Things in that Winona Ryder's character, like, okay, the mom in Poltergeist, she, in the midst of all this terror, cracks jokes, has some calm moments in the midst of all this screaming, which is very real. It's not inconsistent. It's that she's a person and you can see her trying to deal while she's trying to connect, as opposed to, unfortunately, Winona Ryder's character in Stranger Things is written such that she is just hysterical on 11 for a whole season. And it's hard. It got better, but it's hard to connect to that character,
which is especially unfortunate when they did such a great job with the kids, you know. And it's like this is this thing that writers aren't doing well right now, and 80s movies did very well, and the Duffer Brothers have done this very well. These kids, we love them, we like them, we're rooting for them. I'm an adult, and I really want to hang out with these kids, you know. And I think the It movie did a good job of it too. It's refreshing. I think if we're nostalgic for anything, it's better writing, you know. As much as I like seeing an 80s shopping mall, I really like that the kids are likable and relatable. The Winona dilemma, and I am a huge Winona fan. I mean, I loved Heather's Beetlejuice, all of her stuff back then, but I question both whether it's the writing problematic to some degree, but I also think her performance is just not very good. I don't know what she's doing playing it at a level 10.
Does she have kids?
No.
See, I think that's the problem. Is she doesn't really read as a real mother to me on screen. And maybe that's a fucked up like criticism, but
Are you saying stay in your lane, Winona?
No, she just seems more like a cat lady than a concerned mom.
Well, I think I hate to say it, but I think we know she's like mentally ill. In the industry, she has a terrible, terrible reputation as far as on-set behavior. I think the Duffer Brothers, probably like me, thought, oh my God, how cool would it be to get Winona Ryder? And so sometimes it's sort of like, and then she's probably on the set in a little bit untouchable. TV directors might be intimidated by her. You know, so it's a weird thing where she's just not delivering. And most of the actors, by and large, in that show, including the adults as well, I think are delivering, you know, and are fitting in. Somehow she feels like she's in a different show almost.
Yeah, one of the things I love about Stranger Things is it brings back the like average to unattractive actor, you know, because like especially in horror remakes, like everyone's hot. Like that was like the criticism with like the Texas Chainsaw Massacre remake is like the gas station guy's hot. Like everybody is like LA hot. Yeah. And you know, this movie has bald eagle guy who's, you know, when's the last time you've seen somebody with like, you know, good dome on top, like, you know, the hair around the side? Like I haven't seen that in decades,
right?
Like, on the street.
Well, I think also that can come to feed into why child actors aren't as good, aren't like they used to be. Is it might be that when you're casting a film and you're culling from Disney perfect,
you want the next Zac Efron kids, or whatever,
right? You're gonna get a bunch of very static, uninteresting performances. Am I contradicting what you're saying? I'm saying
no. I agree with you.
You're right.
When you're only looking for beautiful kids rather than talented kids.
Yes.
And what's great about Stranger Things, the kids aren't ugly. They're real looking. They're awkward looking. They're weird looking. They cast kids who can perform. You know, look at Shelley Duvall. Look at Sissy Spacek. Neither of them are what we would have considered beauties then or now. But casting directors, were looking for actors. And in some ways, you could argue maybe the more unusual you look or less conventionally beautiful, the more relatable you are to the average moviegoer. You know, whereas when everyone in Texas Chainsaw Massacre looks like some cheesy Instagram influencer, it's like, okay, chop her up.
Yeah, it's like a road rule. It's like road rules with a chainsaw. You know,
right? Exactly.
Stranger
Things does it well, and a movie like Poltergeist, while no one's unattractive necessarily. They do seem like a real, upper middle class white American family.
It was friends that are over for football at the beginning or just straight mutants. You know?
but believable.
Yeah, yeah.
and that whole football scene, where they're doing the remote control. What is the TV show the kid wants to watch? Is it Mr. Rogers?
Mr. Rogers, yeah.
So good.
And they had that weird like remote control gunfight.
Yes, I
between the
love
houses.
it.
Yeah.
But again, really funny, relatable, cute filmic moments that I'm sure audiences. I mean, I never saw it in the theater. Well, I have seen it in the theater since because I've screened it a bunch of times. But when it came out, I'm sure that all that connective tissue was important to building this story that people are going to care about. And so many movies today, and as much as, I thought Midsummer was really, really interesting, my biggest problem with it was like, I don't care about you guys. Like, I don't know why we're even here. Are we here because you have a relationship that's struggling and how you're putting the pieces back together or trying to save this thing? Are we here because you just went through this traumatic experience of losing your parents and I know it sounds like a spoiler, but it happens in the first 10 minutes and, of the movie. But it just was sort of like I couldn't identify with her really. And the other people that were on that journey were jerks for the most part. I want to like these characters, then watch them be tortured.
I always shit on Marvel movies, but the films that I think do those little points that make you really love and fall for the characters really well are the two Guardians of the Galaxy movies and Thor Ragnarok especially. Like those three movies like are very, very good at the in-between moments that are hilarious.
Ragnarok for sure.
Yeah.
Which I have not seen, but I've heard nothing but good things about.
Well, Taika Waititi, he's probably, I mean, in my opinion, one of my favorite directors. And now he's got some movie where he plays Hitler, where it's like, fucking go for it, dude. It's so good.
Well, I think one of the reasons I liked Get Out so much was because early on, I really liked that guy.
Yeah.
I really felt like this is a good guy. I really like him. Now, the girlfriend, fine, but like that's what makes it good. You like her and then you don't. I don't know. I feel like it's important to establish those things. I mean, it's actually almost popular now to make unlikable protagonists, and it's sort of like that only works like 1% of the time.
Right.
It's very hard to pull off.
Yeah. So what have we learned?
Poltergeist is amazing. I think the visual effects. Someone criticized them the other day. To me, I forget who it was. It was like a young person. They were like, "Oh, it's just so cheesy," and I was like,
I mean, look at everything else at the time.
It was amazing, and it still holds up to me. I mean, really holds up.
The moment when the white PhD guy is pulling his face apart looks totally fake and is still really fucking
Right.
It's terrifying
And disgusting.
and it's really disgusting. And you don't buy it for a second, but I'd rather not buy it and still be horrified than watch some sort of CGI try desperately to look realistic, but I feel detached from the experience and it's not as visceral.
Yeah, I mean, that's my biggest criticism of Stranger Things. Love, 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 love Stranger Things. Now, by season 3, I'm used to it. But I do feel like with all that perfection, nostalgia, at play, and they really nailed so much of it. Every time a big CGI effect happens, I'm like, well, we're not in the 80s.
Well, people are talking about how good the monster is in the third season. I think it is trash. Like,
really?
I think the scenes where the rats explode it's a cool idea and it's very creepy, but I think it looks like shit.
Well, it definitely looks like animation.
Yeah.
I mean, it doesn't look right. And I think, even intercutting some practical rats blowing up, I mean, how hard could that be?
I mean, look, like the Trick or Treat and Krampus, those are like largely practical effect movies, and they look great and they're enhanced with CGI, but like it has so much weight on screen. Compared to
I loved both of those, and I love that idea of leading with practical and using CGI as the polish. But when you lead with the CGI, it just takes me out. Like that whole machine the Russians were using to open up the Upside Down. It looked so ridiculous, animated. It's like, just make a cheesy practical version. It doesn't have to be that elaborate. It doesn't have to look like an enormous transformer.
It would almost look better if it was like something out of the A-Team anyway.
Right.
You know, like some goofy ass MacGyver device.
And we would buy, I don't know. I mean, the practical mall they built was pretty incredible. I mean, they had a Sam Goody. But yeah, I think Poltergeist, as far as the practical effects, I think they do hold up. I think the score, the movie, the performances, the whole movie should be considered a horror classic. And for many, many years, I don't think it was. But I think it really is now. I think a lot of people are going, oh, this movie should be, alongside Halloween, Texas Chainsaw Massacre. It's a classic.
Yeah. So we've got some email that has been sent to us at whatthe@scarythoughts.org. And the first one is from Dirk Fontenot, who has written us before. Hey, Dirk. And he says, I don't know why you guys don't do Eyes Wide Shut. I understand Mark's reservations, sure, because I've talked shit about it before. But revisit it today. Whether you feel any differently, whatever, but at least you'll come away with additional unrealized perspective from prior. What do you guys think?
I'm so down for this movie, doing it now, especially in light of all the Jeffrey Epstein shit in the news.
Wow. Okay.
I mean, I think any film by Stanley Kubrick is worth exploring.
True.
It's not the one I would choose to lead with, but maybe in some ways that's what makes it more interesting to discuss.
Yeah.
I probably, for me, would need to rewatch it because I only saw it once, and I actually just don't like Tom Cruise.
No.
And I find him unlikable in most things, with the exception of Interview with a Vampire. For whatever reason, I think he's really good in that and delivers a great performance.
I totally agree. This is one of the things Mark and I most disagree with. Is I love that movie.
It's great.
I put
He's
it in
great.
it's in my top 3 vampire movies.
I love it too.
I was working the door at the bar the other night, and there was this guy. He came in. He was just immediately a fucking douchebag, and I did the not sure if I'm going to let you in. I might use I think you're drunk as an excuse to get rid of this guy.
Right.
So I sort of scrutinized him for a bit, and his I assume girlfriend looked at my pins, and I have these enamel pins that are very horror adjacent. And she's like, "You into horror?" Like, uh-huh. She goes, "What, Interview with a Vampire?" I'm like, "No." She goes, "Pfft," and walks inside.
Oh my God, that's hilarious.
So she likes Interview with a Vampire, and so do you, Chad. Anyway.
No shame.
We also got an email from Cameron Marquez, and he says, Hola, amigos. I've recently watched a horror film, and then he links to the YouTube trailer for Beneath Us that deals with what I would call contemporary horror, and I was wondering what you guys see as the future of American discourse regarding immigration, race relations, etc. As a Sambo living in the times of racial realism and increased border speak, I'm just not very hopeful about the trajectory of our discourse as we propel into the future in the presence of abundant resources, let alone as they begin to dwindle. Will the West collapse because of multiculturalism, privilege, or segregation into ethno-states? Will horror be there to document it? I haven't seen Beneath Us, but it's a bunch of it's basically a captivity horror. It's a bunch of day laborers. At least from the trailer, it seems it's some day laborers basically get imprisoned by the woman who hired them to do some yard work, and they're just sort of slaves on a plantation now.
Oh.
These Latino day laborers. I think, Chad, you had brought up some things around this.
Yeah, I mean, for me, with immigration, there's really 2 sides of the horror. One, you're afraid of a horde coming in to invade your area, so something like World War Z, or you're a person who's being chased through an unfriendly area. And the movie that came to mind for some reason was Apocalypto, Mel Gibson's Apocalypto, which is kind of an immigration story, not exactly an immigration story, but it's basically about a horrific state and incurring on the small group of people who's just trying to get by. But I think what I would like, I think in the email that I sent you about this email, I was saying that I think that the fear of being invaded storyline is being taken care of by movies like Sicario and anything that deals with a cartel or Islamo-fascist terrorist actions or whatever, which seems to be on the decline. I don't think I've seen a Muslims blowing shit up movie in a while.
I saw Hotel Mumbai recently, and it's fucking fantastic. It's a siege movie, but
Yeah.
it's about that.
But I mean, I would like to see like a lower budget made by a South American filmmaker, like trying to cross the border story with all the horrors attached to it, like almost like a City of God on the Road kind of movie. I think would be great, you know. And I think we'll probably see more of it, because the one thing that horror is very good at is addressing current anxieties, and the one thing Hollywood's very good at is addressing growing markets. So as we see like the growing Hispanic market in America with this anxiety, I think we'll probably for sure see something good.
Well, I think the other thing that we're seeing due to the success of something like Get Out, well, specifically Get Out, is that you're dealing with a genre that for the record really has a horrible track record as far as allowing anyone other than a straight white guy to make a movie in the Hollywood system. I mean, you really can't name very significant horror movies that have been made that aren't made by that person. And now Jordan Peele, I think Jordan Peele, and as well as the director of Wonder Woman being a woman, I think Black Panther. You're seeing that not only are these movies being well made, but they're commercially hugely successful because we're desperate for new stories and we're speaking to new audiences, right? So I think you're right. Like, there is a new audience for that kind of horror movie. And we've seen where filmmakers have now proven they've smashed that sort of wall, that ceiling or whatever, and said, you know what? A black guy should make a horror movie. A woman should make a superhero movie. And I mean, even Los Spookies, on HBO,
I was about to bring that up.
is doing very, very well. And so I think we're going to see, and just in my own little universe, I've been reached out to more recently as a direct result, completely a direct result of Jordan Peele, from people looking for queer horror. So it's an interesting new era in the genre.
And it's not like straight white people don't like that shit. I mean, like, RuPaul's Drag Race is fucking huge. Rap music is fucking huge. Mexican food, everybody loves it.
It's just no one made it for straight white people, and those of us have been screaming all along. Yeah, we can make movies that people will like. Now we're finally being given the chance. So, an immigration-based horror movie is kind of. I'm sure there's scripts ready to go.
Yeah,
I mean, just if you read like the reporting of somebody like Charles Bowden. Where he talks about Juarez, and what goes on when people come across it. Just the facts of dealing with coyotes are fucking terrifying. I mean, that shit is out of control. It's just ready to... I mean, I would watch 50 cartel-related movies in a row. Like, that shit is so fascinating to me. It's so dark. I mean, the average cartel soldier is basically like a Hannibal Lecter character.
Right.
I find it almost too disturbing. That's why I tend to like things like Poltergeist and stuff, because like the news and the concentration camps, and I find it all so horrifying and overwhelming that I think I use fantastical horror like as a genre to sort of deal with it in a way. But when something like Catherine Bigelow's film where they're disarming the bombs, The Hurt Locker, it was so intense. Like, I almost had to leave the theater, because when it's that real and that there's people who are dealing with this and these soldiers are out there doing this, I couldn't handle it. But, if it's Freddy Krueger, I'm like, oh my God, this is amazing, because I know it's not real, So the cartel stuff, I mean, even TV shows like Breaking Bad, I mean, my God, I would get so wrapped up in it,
Yeah.
So intense.
The craziest thing I've ever seen is a cartel execution video where they just cut this dude's arms and legs off and beat him to death with them.
Yeah, I could
like,
never watch that.
Yeah.
Why did you watch that?
I just, man,
You had to watch
I
it?
have to watch.
I can't watch that.
Crazy shit.
Yeah, I would just be so, I'm too much of a wimp. Ugh, no.
Okay, moving on to other letters. Okay, last letter from email from Brian Connect. The Dead Don't Die sucked big stinking gender fluid filled balls IMO, although it got two things right and or supported two very interesting ideas. First, it's more fuel on the fire for Monique's charge that Tilda Swinton should play all the roles in Rocky Horror Picture Show. Her eye makeup was very unconventional conventionists. And secondly, an expansion of the zombie world universe that when you die, you become a zombie with two goals, eating brains and whatever the last thing you were thinking about. It would be such a great plot device to give zombies variety and charter depth. One wants brains in Chardonnay, one wants brains in Starbucks, one wants brains in boobies, etc., etc. Lastly, I want to push hard for 3 recommendations. I would so enjoy your thoughts on these films. Suicide Club. Have you seen it?
Mm-mm.
It's good. Have you seen it, Joshua?
Is that the
The
one?
Japanese one.
Oh.
Oh, is it one with the little girls and they all jump on the train together? Oh, I have seen that.
Yeah, it's great. I
I
still
thought it was Sofia Coppola's first movie. What am I thinking of?
Virgin Suicides.
Virgin Suicides. No, okay, so I
terrible
haven't
movie.
seen it.
Under the Shadow, which is this. I'm not being dismissive, but it's basically the Babadook set in the Middle East, and it's fucking fantastic. But there's a lot of overlap there. And I think for me, I would have a hard time addressing Suicide Club and Under the Shadow because there is such a cultural distance between myself and it. I don't know that I would know what to address. Does that make sense? Like, I can talk about Poltergeist because I was a suburban kid in America, in North America, but I don't know what it's like to live in a place where there's bombing going off regularly.
Right.
You know, or
Well, maybe then
or Japan.
another special guest.
Not yet, anyway.
Absolutely. What's that?
Not yet, anyway.
Oh, Jesus Christ.
Right,
Chad.
exactly.
And he also, Brian Kinect also recommends The Skin I Live In.
Oh, I loved that.
Who directed that?
Pedro Almodovar.
Yeah. I've never seen it.
Oh, it's so good.
I need to see that. I need to see more of his
It's
movies.
definitely his sort of horror movie, monster movie, you know, and it's Antonio Banderas as a sort of a mad scientist.
Oh. Is it kind of horror adjacent?
Yeah, for sure. I mean, I
Okay.
think it's definitely Almodovar's really best earnest attempt at horror. You know, it premiered at Cannes and half the audience walked out.
Oh, that's...
And
I'm
That's a good
sold.
sign.
yeah. And I mean, big part of it is that it's a revenge film, and Antonio Banderas is taking revenge on his daughter's rapist. And what's interesting about that is the way Pedro Almodovar presents the crime. You're not quite sure if it was. It's very like
Okay.
it's what's the word? It's got questionable content all throughout it. And that's what it is. It's
Right.
walking the line through the whole thing of like right and wrong. And it's really, really good. And I don't want to give too much away, but you should watch it.
Okay, definitely. All right, before we go, want to ask our listeners, we talked about this in the last episode, but we are going to be launching a sort of parallel splinter subject podcast called Self-Help for Nihilists. And it's going to take many forms. I don't want to reiterate everything we said about it last time, but I mean, Self-Help for Nihilists is pretty self-explanatory. Some episodes of Self-Help for Nihilists will be a sort of advice column formatted, so you can write to us at
Nihilists at scarythoughts.org.
tell us what you have that's a problem, what needs solving. Okay, you can join our mailing list at scarythoughts.org. We send out an email with things every episode. And thank you so much for joining us, Joshua.
Yeah, thank you for having me.
That was really fun.
I
I'm glad you
enjoyed it.
chose that movie.
Me too.
Yeah. And we will see you next time for Scary Things. Oh my God. We will see you next time for
I can't even remember.
Stranger Things.
Stranger
Stranger
Things
Things
Season
3.
3. Jesus. What happened? You know, it's not infrequent that I refer to this podcast as Stranger Things.
You called it Scary Things.
I just mean it's all just, it gets conflated at this
yeah.
point.
I feel like I just did that on the Popcorn Piss and Vinegar guys show.
I think
when
you
we were
did.
talking about scary.
I think you did.
We were talking about Stranger Things. I just fucking did it.
Yeah,
like
see?
I just did
Yeah.
it again.
STSTSTA.
Yeah.
All right. Thanks for listening.
Bye.